I don't know if you can hear that, but little Bodhi kitten who's getting longer and longer each day. He's outside of the office door, mewling for attention. I had a couple things that I wanted to talk about that have to do with gender, specifically female to male gender. Now, there was this case that was at least decided on one level of, I don't know exactly how the UK judiciary works, so I'm sure this decision will be appealed, but one Keira Bell had sued the NHS Trust and others, it says here, because she had proceeded down the path of medicalization, transgender medicalization. She was put on certain drugs and also had her breasts removed, and then sued because she didn't think that she was getting the proper care. The court came down in her favor, and this brief, I just wanted to point out a few things in this brief. So, this claim for judicial review concerned the lawfulness of the practice of the Tavistock and Portman NHS Trust through its Gender Identity Development Service, GIDS, G-I-D-S, for prescribing puberty-suppressing drugs to children who experience gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is a condition where persons experience distress because of a mismatch between their perceived identity and their natal sex. That is, their sex at birth. Now, I'm pretty sure that once you're born, your sex is decided before birth and continues on long after your birth. You can't actually change your sex. Such persons have a strong desire to live according to their perceived identity rather than their natal sex. The puberty-blocking drugs were prescribed to children as young as 10 to halt the process of puberty, that is, the biological processes that would otherwise occur and would lead to the development of the primary and secondary sexual characteristics. Now, puberty doesn't just, precede the development of your primary and secondary sexual characteristics, but your entire body, your bone structure, your organ structure, and your gray matter. And these puberty-suppressing drugs also affect the entire person, that entire development. To what extent, we don't know exactly, because there had not been sufficient research into this. There were two claimants. Quincy Bell was born a female and at about the age of 15 was prescribed puberty-blocking drugs to halt the process of developing female sexual characteristics. She eventually transitioned to a male, having taken cross-sex hormones to promote male characteristics and then undergoing surgery. A is the mother of a 15-year-old girl. A is concerned that her daughter may be referred to the Gender Identity Development Service and may be prescribed puberty blockers. Gender identity development. That's really interesting. There's a service to help you develop your gender identity, but it also includes drugs and surgery. So it's not just your identity that's being developed, but your body. So this is a form of transhumanism. The claimants contend that the practice of prescribing puberty-blocking drugs to children under 18 was unlawful as they lacked competence to give valid consent to the treatment. The court in this case was concerned with the legal requirements for obtaining consent for the carrying out of medical treatment. The court was not concerned with deciding whether there were benefits or disbenefits, first time I've encountered that word, in treating children with gender dysphoria with puberty-blocking drugs. The legal issue in the case concerned identifying the circumstances in which a child was competent, as a matter of law, to give valid consent to treatment. So this court case is not about whether or not the puberty-blocking drugs are good or bad, but whether or not children are capable of consenting to medicalization, specifically with these puberty-blocking drugs. The court held that in order for a child to be competent to give valid consent, the child would have to understand, retain, and weigh the following information. I, the immediate consequences of the treatment in physical and psychological terms. 2, double I, the fact that the vast majority of patients taking puberty-blocking drugs proceed to taking cross-sex hormones and are, therefore, a pathway to much greater medical interventions. Triple I, the relationship between taking cross-sex hormones and subsequent surgery with the implications of such surgery. IV, the fact that cross-sex hormones may well lead to loss of fertility. V, the impact of cross-sex hormones on sexual function. VI, the impact of taking this step on the treatment pathway may have on future and lifelong relationships. VII, the unknown physical consequences of taking puberty-blocking drugs. Literally, the consequences are unknown. So can a child have an understanding enough to consent to what is unknown? That's a big question. And VIII, the fact that the evidence base for this treatment is as yet highly uncertain. The court considered that it was highly unlikely that a child aged 13 or under would be competent to give consent to the administration of puberty blockers. It was also doubtful that a child aged 14 or 15 could understand and weigh the long-term risks and consequences of the administration of puberty blocking drugs. In respect of young persons aged 16 and over, the legal position is that there is a statutory presumption that they have the ability to consent to medical treatment. Given the long-term consequences of the clinical interventions at issue in this case, and given that the treatment is as yet innovative and experimental, the court recognized that clinicians may well regard these as cases where the authorization of the court should be sought before starting treatment with puberty-blocking drugs. The court has granted a declaration to reflect the points on which the application succeeded. So basically, the court decided that children were not able to understand the full consequences of this experimental and innovative treatment. I mean, if we are calling these treatments experimental and innovative, and we are uncertain about them, how can we be certain ourselves, let alone allow a child to be certain about that? So that is one piece of the gender puzzle as it is being moved. I guess it's kind of a chess game, how this gender ideology is meeting up with the law and medicalization. So there's law, medicalization, and then there's a social aspect of it. And that's the other piece of information that I wanted to discuss. This actor, Elliot Page, who is known for their role in Juno, and if I were to speak about their previous name, which was the name that they were using last night, I would be dead naming them. So it's improper for me to use this person's previous name, but they came out as trans, as a man, and their pronouns are he, they at this point in time. They released this message or this letter to the world at large. Hi, friends. I want to share with you that I am trans. My pronouns are he, they, and my name is Elliot. I feel lucky to be writing this, to be here, to have arrived at this place in my life. I feel overwhelming gratitude for the incredible people who have supported me along this journey. I can't begin to express how remarkable it feels to finally love who I am enough to pursue my authentic self. I've been endlessly inspired by so many in the trans community. Thank you for your courage, your generosity, and ceaselessly working to make this world a more inclusive and compassionate place. I will offer whatever support I can and continue to strive for a more loving and equal society. I ask for your patience. My joy is real, but it is also fragile. The truth is, despite feeling profoundly happy right now and knowing how much privilege I carry, I am also scared. I'm scared of the invasiveness, the hate, the jokes, and of violence. To be clear, I am not trying to dampen a moment that is joyous and one that I celebrate, but I want to address the full picture. The statistics are staggering. The discrimination towards trans people is rife, insidious, and cruel, resulting in horrific consequences. In 2020 alone, it has been reported that at least 40 transgender people have been murdered, the majority of which were Black and Latinx trans women. On that note, the transgender murder rate is at par or even lower than the murder rate of other populations or populations at large. It's not a staggering difference in murder than what other people experience, insofar as people experience murder. Also, from what I've read, it doesn't always or necessarily have to do, the murder rate of trans individuals doesn't necessarily have to do with them being transgender. It's just that they're in a situation where murder is more likely, aka sex work. To continue. To the political leaders who work to criminalize trans healthcare and deny our right to exist, and to all of those with a massive platform who continue to spew hostility towards the trans community, you have blood on your hands. You unleash a fury of vile and demeaning rage that lands on the shoulders of the trans community, a community in which 40% of trans adults report attempting suicide. That statistic, which is contested, mentioning that statistic, you have to wonder if there are comorbidities to being trans with other health care issues. You have to wonder that. Does it actually have to do solely and principally to being trans or to the way in which the trans community is treated or represented online and off? To continue, enough is enough. You aren't being canceled. You are hurting people. I am one of those people, and we won't be silent in the face of your attacks. I love that I am trans, and I love that I am queer. And the more I hold myself close and fully embrace who I am, the more I dream, the more my heart grows, and the more I thrive. To all trans people who deal with harassment, self-loathing, abuse, and the threat of violence every day, I see you, I love you, and I will do everything I can to change this world for the better. Thank you for reading this. All my love, Elliot. So just looking at that language, it seems to me that this person is on the warpath. And if you actually look at the way in which people act for the trans community online, especially on Twitter, they are very bullying. Now, there's all this, there's a very strong media push, and there's a very strong push that is emergent, that is crowdsourced, that forces people to go along with self-declaration. Everybody around this community has to change their language, and if they're not changing their language, if we ourselves who are outside of that community are not changing our language, changing our laws, rearranging society around this community, we are called vile, we are called bullies, we are called, we are said to have blood on our hands. The rhetoric is off the charts with this stuff. It is very, very emotive, and it presents a feedback loop where you have a very strong, large public figure like Elliot Page here. Her ideas trickle down to young females and young males, and then they force their parents to put them on these puberty blockers and then go through this path of transformation that if the child wasn't put on puberty blockers and they had gender dysphoria, a majority of people, of children who experience gender dysphoria, desist by the time they get used to their body a bit. I don't want to go too far into the content of Elliot's declaration or what they define as trans or why they are becoming trans or have always been trans or are just now announcing that they are trans at this point in life. There is evidence from their previous history that they were very proud being a lesbian, having a lesbian marriage, and now I guess that is a heterosexual marriage. And there's a lot of different things that move around when we start to play around with these categories. And I understand that the categories of gender are restrictive to some people, and I understand that some people are non-conforming naturally, emergently. They don't conform according to how we perceive males and females generally performing and behaving, and then they experience dissonance in themselves and with society, either with their body or just with the way that they want to behave in society. And I think that we can do a lot of work to relax the expectations and the norms around how females and males are to behave. But behind this transgender thought process or ideology or viewpoint or worldview, there is a lot of other things happening, and you see it in the language, and then you see how it affects children. You see how it affects young people, and you see how with the involvement of the medical industry in this, we have some irreversible damage taking place. So it's a fraught topic. It's a hot topic. It's the other side of our current eternal culture war. There's race. And if you stand up against current racial narratives of anti-racist narratives or diversity, inclusion, etc. narratives, if you stand up against or you question those narratives, you are accused of being a racist and you're accused of being a reactionary and so on and so forth. You're not supposed to not go along with the certain racial narratives that are being pushed. And there's also these gender narratives. This gender ideology and this racial ideology are kind of something that's kind of trapping our society. We're going back and forth and back and forth. And I believe that there are ways to deal with these issues, to question these issues, to inject skepticism and nuance into these topics without vilifying people, and to kind of very slowly, patiently, and respectfully go through and sort through all this stuff. But it has a very, very powerful effect, especially in addition to social media, in shaping how people see themselves and others. So I think that is something that we need to be very careful about. So up in Canada, there's this Bill C6. And today they just had a hearing about Bill C6, and I watched about half of it. I'm going to watch more. That Bill C6 is intended to stop conversion therapy, right? And conversion therapy used to be about switching one's sexuality from homosexual to heterosexual, and now they're upgrading conversion therapy to include gender therapy. And you're not supposed to push somebody out of being not cisgender. It's very one-way bill where you are allowed to push somebody to change their body from male to trans or from female to trans. You're totally allowed to coach them to do that, but you're not allowed to talk them out of that. It's very interesting. It's very lopsided, and it's very confused because they're mixing sexuality with gender identity, and they're not making any distinction between those two things. So I want to cover that as well. It's a hot week for the gender topic. And I hope that I added something that's of the middle path, that's both questioning and respectful. But I know that a lot of people have a lot of very strong emotions about this, just like the race thing. It's really interesting that these are the two poles of our identity kind of warfare or contention, the tug of war. Anyway, so I will let you guys go, and I'll talk to you soon. Stay tuned for some wonderful interviews later on this week. If you are a new subscriber, because I made a video about Jordan Peterson, do be sure to check out my Evergreen documentary. It's on my main page. You will understand why I am involved in the things that I am involved with, having had a front row seat to a major societal intersectional meltdown and wanting to allay that as much as possible from spreading across the world. Anyhow, this is Benjamin Boyce signing off. Toodaloo.